With a private army closing in, Jack stood at the edge of a frozen abyss. The only way across was a rotting cable car that could not hold them all. He looked at Elena, the love of his life, and the husband she chose over him. To save her, Jack knew he had to cut the line and trap himself on the side of death. But he did not know that his loyal dog, Shadow, had already made a heartbreaking choice of his own. The wind screamed against the timber walls of the old fire lookout station, threatening to tear the structure from its foundation high in the Adirondack Mountains. It was the winter of 2024, and the forecast had predicted the worst blizzard in a decade. Jack, a man of 40 with a face weathered by years of high-altitude sun and biting frost, stood by the rattling window. He wore a heavy charcoal wool sweater that smelled of wood smoke and pine. His eyes, usually sharp and observant from his years as a search and rescue captain, were now tired and guarded. Since the accident that ended his career, he had chosen this solitude, preferring the brutal honesty of nature to the complexities of human connection. Beside the cast-iron stove lay Shadow. He was a magnificent 5-year-old German Shepherd with a unique coat of silver and white fur, a testament to his sable lineage. Shadow was a retired rescue dog, disciplined and calm, but tonight he was not resting. He paced the floorboards, his ears swiveling like radar dishes. Suddenly, Shadow stopped pacing and let out a low, urgent whine deep in his throat. Seconds later, a dull, heavy thud vibrated through the floor, followed by the sickening sound of metal crunching against solid wood. It came from the access road below. Jack grabbed his heavy canvas jacket and a flashlight. He signaled Shadow. With me. Outside, the snow was blinding. They fought their way down the slope to where an old pine tree stood near the bend. A black SUV had skidded off the ice, its front end crumpled against the trunk. Steam hissed from the radiator, vanishing instantly in the gale. Jack wrenched the driver's side door open. A woman slumped over the steering wheel. As she lifted her head, the beam of the flashlight illuminated her face. She was in her mid-30s, with dark, intelligent eyes and wet, matted hair framing a pale face. It was Elena. Jack felt the breath leave his lungs, and it had nothing to do with the cold. Elena, the woman who had walked out of his life 5 years ago, was bleeding on his doorstep. "Help us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Please, my husband is hurt." "Husband." The word struck Jack like a physical blow. He looked past her to the passenger seat. There sat a man, groaning in pain. This was David. He was slim, wearing expensive wire-rimmed glasses and a city coat that offered no protection against this weather. He looked like an academic or a lawyer, completely out of his element. Jack suppressed the urge to turn back to his cabin alone. His training took over. He helped Elena out, then moved to David. The man cried out as Jack shifted him. His leg was broken, bent at an unnatural angle. With Shadow breaking the trail through the drifts, Jack half-carried, half-dragged the injured man up the hill, with Elena stumbling behind them. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the fire offered a stark contrast to the freezing hell outside. Jack set David on the rug and began splinting the leg with practiced, efficient movements. He worked in silence, his jaw set tight. Once David was stabilized, Jack stood up and wiped his hands on a rag. He looked at Elena, his expression cold. "The storm will last until tomorrow morning," Jack said, his voice flat. "You stay until the roads are clear, then you leave. I do not want trouble here." Elena looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Before she could speak, a gray shape moved between them. Shadow approached Elena. Instead of the low growl he usually reserved for strangers, the great dog lowered his head and nudged her hand gently with his wet nose. He let out a soft, welcoming sound, his tail thumping rhythmically against the floorboards. He remembered her. He remembered the woman who used to hike these trails with them years ago. Elena dropped to her knees and buried her face in the thick silver fur of the dog's neck, sobbing quietly. Shadow licked the tears from her cheek, offering the comfort that Jack refused to give. Jack watched the scene, the armor around his heart developing a hairline fracture. He turned away to stoke the fire, unable to watch the dog display the forgiveness he himself could not find. The cast-iron stove radiated a fierce heat, but it did little to thaw the icy tension that filled the small cabin. Outside, the blizzard continued to hammer against the log walls, a relentless white roar that made the silence inside feel even heavier. Jack sat in his worn leather armchair, methodically cleaning a knife with a rag. He refused to look at the couple huddled on the rug near the fire. "Jack, please," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. "We cannot stay here. We need to get to the border. It is 10 miles through the forest to the Canadian crossing. You are the only one who knows the trails through the ridge." Jack did not look up. "In this weather? That is suicide. Besides, I am a retired rescue captain, Elena, not a coyote for hire. I do not smuggle fugitives." "He is not a criminal," Elena insisted, her eyes flashing with a spark of the fire he remembered. "David is an environmental lawyer. He has evidence. A chemical corporation has been dumping toxic waste into the groundwater for years. Thousands of children are getting sick. That hard drive in his pocket is the only thing that can prove it." Jack stopped wiping the knife. He looked at David, really looked at him for the first time. The man was shivering, his face pale and beaded with sweat, yet he clutched his jacket pocket as if it contained a diamond. "A lawyer?" Jack muttered, a cynical smirk touching his lips. "Just a weak intellectual playing hero." He stood up and walked over to where David lay. "Let me see the leg." Jack knelt and began to adjust the makeshift splint he had applied earlier. The swelling was bad. He had to tighten the bindings to keep the bone immobilized. It was a procedure that would make a strong man scream. Jack worked with efficient, almost brutal swiftness. A sharp intake of breath hissed through David's teeth. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the rug, and his whole body went rigid. A low groan of agony escaped his throat, but he did not scream. He did not beg Jack to stop. When Jack finished, David slumped back, exhausted, gasping for air. His first words were not about the pain. "The drive," David wheezed, patting his chest pocket. "Is it dry? Is it safe?" Jack stared at him, surprised by the man's stoicism. Before he could answer, a movement caught his eye. Shadow, the silver and white German shepherd, rose from his spot by the door. The large dog walked slowly toward the injured man. Jack watched, expecting the dog to growl or show dominance. Shadow was a judge of character, often more accurate than any human. Instead of aggression, Shadow lowered his heavy body onto the rug, pressing his warm flank gently against David's uninjured leg. The dog rested his chin on his paws, letting out a long, contented sigh, offering his body heat to the shivering stranger. Jack froze. He knew his dog. Shadow did not offer comfort to those with malice in their hearts. The dog sensed something in David, a goodness perhaps, or a sheer lack of selfishness that Jack had refused to see. For the first time that night, the wall of ice around Jack's heart began to crack. He looked at the rival he wanted to hate, and then at the dog who had already accepted him. "Rest," Jack said, his voice losing its sharp edge. "We will talk about the border in the morning." The silence of the cabin was shattered not by the wind, but by a blinding white light that sliced through the gaps in the timber walls. High-intensity floodlights from outside turned the dark interior into a cage of stark, shifting shadows. Jack crawled low across the floor, motioning for Elena and David to get down. Outside, a voice amplified by a megaphone cut through the howling gale. "Come out. We know you have the drive. Hand it over and nobody gets hurt. Refuse and we burn the structure down." The voice was cold, professional, and devoid of any law enforcement authority. "Police?" David whispered, his face pressed against the floorboards. "No," Jack replied, his voice a grim whisper. "Fixers? Private security mercenaries. They are here to clean up the mess, not make arrests." He knew their tactics. They would not storm the front door blindly. They would flush them out with fire or gas. He had to move fast. Jack reached under the heavy oak table and pulled a hidden cord. A series of metallic clatters erupted from the perimeter of the cabin as tin cans filled with pebbles, rigged as early warning alarms, were triggered by his manual override. The noise sounded like the cocking of multiple rifles. Outside, the mercenaries shouted, confusing the rattling cans for an armed ambush. They pulled back, seeking cover. Jack used the momentary confusion to slide a heavy rug aside, revealing a trapdoor leading to the old root cellar. It was a narrow escape tunnel dug during the Prohibition era, leading out to the dense tree line behind the ridge. "Go," Jack ordered Elena. "Drag him if you have to." Elena hesitated, looking at the dog. Shadow stood by the front door, his hackles raised, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. "Shadow, stay," Jack commanded. Elena looked horrified. "We cannot leave him." "He has a job to do," Jack said, his eyes hard. He looked at the German shepherd and gave a hand signal, a sharp point toward the front window. "Speak!" Shadow unleashed a ferocious volley of barks. The sound was deep and thunderous, projecting the presence of a guard dog ready to kill at the main entrance. To the men outside, it sounded like the primary threat was concentrated at the front door. While Shadow created the auditory diversion, Jack lowered David into the darkness of the tunnel, then helped Elena down. He took one last look at his dog. Shadow paused his barking for a split second, locking eyes with Jack. The understanding between them was absolute. Jack dropped into the hole and pulled the trapdoor shut above him. As they crawled through the damp, frozen earth of the tunnel, the muffled sound of Shadow barking continued relentlessly above them. The dog was holding the line, drawing the entire attention of the hunting party to the empty cabin, buying them the precious seconds they needed to vanish into the white oblivion of the storm. The tunnel exit was a narrow fissure hidden beneath the roots of a massive ancient oak tree. Jack climbed out first, pulling Elena and David into the biting wind of the forest. Moments later, a gray shape emerged from the earth behind them. Shadow shook the dirt from his silver coat, his tail low but wagging slightly. He had held his post until the mercenaries breached the front door, then slipped into the tunnel to rejoin his pack just in time. They were now deep in the Adirondack wilderness, a place Jack called the Black Forest. The snow here was waist-deep, a suffocating blanket of white that made every step a battle against gravity. David collapsed into a snowbank, his face gray with exhaustion. He could not go any further on the broken leg. Jack drew his survival knife. He moved to a cluster of saplings, cutting down 2 sturdy spruce poles. Using paracord from his survival kit, he lashed cross braces between the poles to create a travois, a primitive drag sled used by indigenous people for centuries. He fashioned a harness from the webbing of his backpack. "Here, boy," Jack whispered. Shadow stepped forward willingly. Jack attached the makeshift harness to the dog. He took the main weight of the sled across his own chest, while Shadow pulled from the side, effectively doubling their horsepower. Together, man and dog began to drag the injured lawyer through the drifts. An hour later, they stopped to rest under the shelter of a rock overhang. David had passed out from the pain. Jack checked David's pulse, then looked at Elena. "Why did you really leave 5 years ago?" he asked, his voice low. Elena rubbed her gloved hands together. "It was not because I stopped loving you, Jack. It was because David was dying." Jack stared at her. "Dying?" "He had a rare autoimmune disease in 2019, Elena explained, her breath pluming in the cold air. "He needed constant care. He was weak, helpless. I could not abandon him to die alone while I played happy families with you." She looked down at her sleeping husband. "He survived. And when he got better, he did not go back to a safe life. He decided to fight for people who could not fight for themselves. He is not weak, Jack. He is the bravest man I know." Jack looked at the unconscious man on the sled. He had misjudged David. He had seen physical frailty and assumed cowardice. He nodded slowly, a silent apology. "We move," Jack said. They pushed forward. The terrain grew treacherous as they approached a dense grove of fir trees. Elena took the lead to break the trail. Suddenly, Shadow let out a sharp, piercing bark. He abandoned his position at the sled and lunged forward, slamming his heavy body into Elena's legs. Elena cried out as she was knocked backward into the snow. "What are you doing?" Jack rushed forward, grabbing Shadow's collar. He looked at where Elena had been about to step. To the untrained eye, it looked like flat snow near the base of a large fir tree. Jack poked the spot with his ski pole. The snow instantly collapsed, revealing a deep, dark hollow around the tree trunk. "A tree well," Jack said grimly. The branches shelter the base of the tree from snow, creating a deep pit of loose powder. If you had stepped there, you would have fallen in headfirst. You would have suffocated before we could dig you out. Elena stared at the black hole in the snow, her face pale. She looked at Shadow. The dog stood calm and alert, panting softly. He had smelled the difference in the air currents rising from the hidden pit. "He saved my life," she whispered. Jack patted the dog's thick neck. "That is what he does." The ground ended abruptly at the edge of a sheer cliff that dropped hundreds of feet into a black abyss. The wind here was ferocious, howling up from the gorge like a chorus of damned souls. Spanning the terrifying gap was a rusted steel cable, disappearing into the blizzard on the far side. Suspended from it was a solitary open-air metal cage, a relic from a logging operation abandoned in the 1960s. "This is the only way," Jack shouted over the gale. He ran to the control mechanism, a massive iron wheel anchored to a concrete block. It was encased in a thick shell of ice. Jack cursed under his breath. He grabbed a heavy iron bar lying near the base and began to hammer at the gears. The sound of metal striking ice rang out sharply, chipping away the frozen prison until the wheel finally groaned and turned a fraction of an inch. Behind them, through the trees, the sweeping beams of flashlights cut through the snow. The mercenaries were less than 5 minutes away. Jack dragged the metal cage closer to the edge. "Get in," he ordered. He helped Elena hoist David into the swaying basket. David was barely conscious, his face gray with pain. Elena climbed in next to him, terrified as the cage lurched over the void. She grabbed Shadow by the collar, pulling the large dog into the basket with her. "Come on, Shadow, you are coming with us," she cried, wrapping her arms around his neck. Jack froze. He looked at the heavy iron wheel. It required manual operation. Someone had to stay behind to crank the cage across the gorge. "I will send you across," Jack yelled, gripping the iron handle. "What about you?" Elena screamed, panic rising in her voice. Jack forced a confident grin, though his eyes remained serious. "The system has a return pulley. Once you are safe, I will pull the cage back and follow you. Go." It was a lie. Jack knew the return mechanism was rusted solid. Once the cage reached the other side, he intended to smash the drive shaft, cutting the cable and stranding himself on this side to stop the pursuit permanently. Shadow seemed to sense the deception. As Elena tried to pull him down to the floor of the cage, the dog stiffened. He looked at Elena, then turned his gaze to Jack, who stood alone by the wheel in the freezing wind. "Shadow, stay with her," Jack commanded, pointing to the cage. But for the first time, the dog disobeyed. With a powerful twist of his body, Shadow broke free from Elena's grasp. He leaped out of the swinging basket, landing softly in the snow next to Jack. "No," Elena screamed, reaching out. "Shadow!" Jack looked down at his companion. The dog pressed his shoulder against Jack's leg, his ears pinned back, his stance unmovable. He had made his choice. He would not leave his master to face the darkness alone. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at Elena one last time and shook his head slowly. "Take care of him," Jack whispered, referring to David. He turned his back on them and grabbed the frozen wheel. With a grunt of exertion, he began to turn it. The rusted gears screeched in protest, and the cage began to move, carrying Elena and David away from the cliff edge and into the swirling white void. The rusted iron basket groaned as it finally struck the concrete platform on the Canadian side of the gorge. Through the driving snow, Jack watched as Elena scrambled out, pulling David to safety onto the solid ground. They were safe. The nightmare was over for them. On Jack's side of the cliff, the beams of flashlights danced wildly through the trees, now only yards away. The mercenaries were closing the net. Jack did not hesitate. He picked up a heavy felling axe that had been mounted on the wall of the control shed for decades. With a primal grunt of exertion, he swung the weapon down onto the exposed drive shaft of the pulley system. The sound of metal shearing through rusted iron rang out like a gunshot in the canyon. Sparks flew. Jack swung again, and then a third time. With a screech that echoed off the canyon walls, the locking pin shattered. The tension in the main cable released instantly. The steel line whipped violently, dropping into the abyss with a thunderous crash. The basket on the far side fell uselessly against the rock face, the bridge between the two worlds severed forever. Just as the cable fell, the mercenary team burst into the clearing. They skidded to a halt at the edge of the precipice, shouting in frustration as they looked at the impossible gap. They raised their weapons, aiming at Jack. But before they could fire, a new sound pierced the storm. From the logging road behind the mercenaries, the wail of sirens rose above the wind. Blue and red lights flashed against the snow-laden pine trees. Jack had made the call on his emergency radio channel an hour ago. The state police were not here for him. They were here for the armed men terrorizing the mountain. The mercenaries turned in panic, realizing they were now trapped between a sheer cliff and a squadron of state troopers. Across the gorge, Elena stood at the railing. She looked across the misty void, searching for the man who had saved them. Through the veil of falling snow, she saw him. Jack stood like a statue at the edge of the world, his silhouette stark against the white background. Beside him sat Shadow, the silver and white German shepherd, looking proud and unbreakable. Jack did not wave. He simply raised a hand to his brow in a slow, solemn salute. It was a farewell, a final acknowledgement of a bond that had been broken and healed in the span of a single night. Elena watched through her tears as Jack lowered his hand. He turned away from the cliff, away from her, and away from the chaos unfolding behind him. He signaled to Shadow. Together, the man and the dog walked toward the dense, dark tree line to the north, moving away from the police lights and back into the wild silence of the mountain. Jack whispered into the wind, his voice lost to everyone but the dog at his side. Some paths must be walked alone so that others can find their way home. Within moments, they were gone, vanished into the white wilderness like ghosts of the Adirondacks, leaving only footprints that the snow would soon erase. Sometimes, the hardest part of loving someone is watching them walk away to safety while you stay behind in the storm. Yet, as Jack and Shadow showed us, no path is truly lonely when walked with a loyal heart. If you found comfort in this tale of sacrifice and courage, please honor their journey by liking this video and sharing your own story in the comments below. We have many more trails to explore together, so please subscribe to stay with us and click the video on your screen now to begin our next adventure.